I want to start with what I think is the most interesting fight going on in the states right now as far as gun policy is concerned. And that's in Tennessee over this proposal from Governor Bill Lee, who's a Republican. Obviously, Republicans have majorities in both houses of their legislature there as well. But Governor Lee wants to implement, he's calling it an order of protection law. Most people would call this a red flag law. He's very reticent to label it that. He thinks it's a political label that he doesn't agree with. But can you just give us what's the latest there going on in the state there? He just called for a special session, right?
Yeah, so he called for a special session in August, which I think is designed to give his administration and some of the legislative leaders who backed his proposal time to do some lobbying with lawmakers, because I think it's going to be Republicans who are most reticent to do this. Democrats see any opening as a good thing, right? So even though this doesn't go nearly as far as they would like, it's a step in the right direction. So they're already going to be on board. You got to convince Republicans, or at least enough Republicans, to get a majority. And I know that Governor Lee, just from a political standpoint, doesn't want to see this pass just because a bare minimum number of Republicans signed on, right? He wants this to have true bipartisan support. And so I think that's why he's kicked the special session back until August. But as far as the particulars of this proposal goes, you're right. Governor Lee has said, don't call this a red flag law. It's a temporary mental health restraining order. But it's not. Because to me, if we're talking about a mental health restraining order, we're talking about restraining an individual because of their mental health concerns, right? And this ultimately is still about taking their guns away. It's not about getting them any sort of treatment. It's not about, the criminal justice system stepping in. It is a gun-centric approach to dealing with supposedly dangerous individuals. So I object to red flag laws on that basis. I think they just go in the wrong direction. But what's interesting, as you say, is that what he's proposing really is different from virtually all of the red flag laws that are on the books. So no ex parte hearings, right? No ex parte hearings. If you are the subject of a petition, you get to be at every court hearing, which is a good thing, right? That alleviates some of the due process concerns. There is mental health involvement in terms of determining whether or not you're a danger to yourself or somebody else. You have the ability to transfer your firearms to a third party. Doesn't have to be that the police go and confiscate your firearms. So, there are some, and by the way, you're also entitled to a representation. If you can't afford an attorney, you get access to a public defender. That's a good thing. And again, that's something that's absent from almost every red flag law in place. So I'll give Governor Lee credit for listening to the concerns of gun owners about due process protections. I think that those are addressed. I still think that the underlying premise, however, takes us in the wrong direction.
Yeah, so we'll get into some of the critiques there, that main overarching critique, but I want to get into some of these differences that are in this initial proposal, at least. Now, I guess this could obviously change as they approach the actual session, which is now a couple months away. But yeah, let's go over a little more detail about how this law works compared to how basically every other red flag law works. Because you're right, so I guess initially the police officer is the only one who can file these requests under this law, is my understanding. And it is, so one of the reasons he's calling this an order of protection instead of a red flag law is that it's expanding on something that already exists in Tennessee, right? They already have this process for somebody who's accused of domestic violence to go through and have their guns removed temporarily. It's a very similar idea as what he's proposing here. He just wants to expand it, I guess, to include these people who've been determined to be a threat to themselves or others. And so there are a number of differences with this process and with most processes. Like you mentioned, most of them, it's an ex parte process. And a lot of people can really apply for one of these or can petition a court. A lot of states are letting teachers or mental health professionals or roommates or relatives do this in addition to police officers. So that's one significant difference. The other one, the first one, is this ex parte aspect of the process, where in most states you file a petition, there's a hearing, you're not informed of the hearing. If you're the subject of the petition, you're not present at the hearing. And then a judge at that hearing decides whether or not there's enough evidence. And the standard is, I think it's the same level of standard in this proceeding as in most of them, which is sort of clear and convincing evidence standard, which is, a lower level, obviously, than a criminal standard, which is beyond a reasonable shadow of a doubt. Right.
Right.
And so, instead of having a judge issue an order before the person being accused of being a threat is even aware of the proceedings, this Tennessee bill would make it so that not only would they have to be at the hearing when this happens, but they would get legal representation if they can't provide their own, and they would have to go through a mental health screening by law, right? This requirement of part of this process instead of, so it's based on an actual mental health professional's evaluation of the individual. And so, I don't know, from your point of view, how significant are those differences?
Well, I think they are significant. Again, but here's the other thing. These protections, right? These improvements over a standard red flag law are also the very things that Democrats in Tennessee are already objecting to. Right? They said, well, you have to have these ex parte hearings, because what if there's an emergency? What if there's, an imminent danger, and you're going to tell this dangerous person, hey, 2 weeks from now, show up in courts because we want to take your guns away. What on earth could that lead to? So, for everything that Bill Lee is trying to do to mollify gun owners and Second Amendment supporters, I think it's, angering the gun control activists, because they are the ones who've written these red flag laws, right? So they know what they want, and they know what they think works, quote unquote. And it has to be baked into the cake that you have to be able to go and get the guns right away. And if that means that the person isn't aware that this hearing is being held, they're not allowed to present a defense, well, so be it, right? You can come back a couple of weeks later, and then they get to have their day in court. So, that's how most red flag laws work. I like the idea, again, of providing these due process protections, but I can see this argument already being raised by Democrats that this doesn't go far enough. Let's say that there is an incident after, let's say that the lawmakers, pass this temporary mental health restraining order, and then somebody who was in the process of, having their guns taken away goes on to commit a violent crime. Democrats are going to point to that right away and say, aha, see, look, you've got to get rid of that provision. It's too weak. The law is basically meaningless. And I think that should be another concern for gun owners, Stephen, that, if you put a useless law on the books, well, the people who support a stronger version of that law are then going to get to argue, hey, look, we need to remove these protections. Right. We need to expand who can file for these petitions because this law isn't working the way it is. If you take that first step, I think it does lead to a slippery slope in this case. And that's why, again, if you're going to be talking about ways to prevent these types of attacks, I think you've got to look at the individual and not just their gun ownership. And so, I would prefer that they actually take a look at actually bolstering the mental health laws and the mental health provisions in Tennessee, rather than trying to label a gun law, however well-intentioned, a mental health proposal.